It started as a faint whisper in the back of my mind, a shadowy doubt that something in my marriage wasn't right. Jenna and I had been married for 8 years, and in that time, I had learned to admire her relentless ambition. She thrived in her career as a marketing executive, constantly jetting off to meetings, conferences, and client dinners. I had always supported her, juggling my freelance writing career to accommodate her unpredictable schedule. But somewhere along the way, the rhythm we had once shared faltered. She grew distant, her smiles fewer and less genuine. The animated stories of her trips faded, replaced by vague mentions of busy meetings and stressful clients. Her eyes, which once lit up when she saw me, seemed clouded, distracted. I tried to brush it off. Stress, I told myself. Maybe even boredom. Every marriage has its ups and downs. But the whisper persisted, louder and more insistent. One Tuesday afternoon, while Jenna was away at a business party with her colleagues, I sat at my desk struggling to focus on a writing assignment. My phone buzzed. A message from Jenna. Meetings ran late. Grabbing dinner with the team. We'll call when I get back to the hotel. Her tone was oddly curt, lacking the warmth I once took for granted. The unease settled in my chest like a heavy stone. Something wasn't right, but I had no proof, just a gut feeling I couldn't shake. That evening, I decided to check social media, scrolling mindlessly until I stumbled across a photo tagged at the event Jenna was attending. There she was, laughing in the corner of a group shot, but it wasn't the carefree smile I remembered. Her posture leaned toward a man I didn't recognize, a stranger in a sharp suit, his hand resting just a bit too comfortably on her lower back. I stared at the image, my pulse quickening. I didn't know what to make of it. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was overthinking. But the whisper turned into a roar. That night, as I lay in bed alone, I replayed every moment of the past few months, every lingering glance at her phone, every late night at the office. The pieces didn't add up, but I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. Instead, I resolved to uncover the truth. Whatever lay beneath the surface, I needed to see it for myself. The next day, I tried to go about my routine as usual, but my mind was a storm of doubt and suspicion. Jenna texted me mid-morning, just a quick, "Hope your day's going well. Love you." But it didn't land the way it used to. It felt hollow, like a well-rehearsed script. Later that afternoon, I decided to look through her social media accounts, not something I'd ever done before, but I couldn't ignore the nagging questions. Her profiles were public, filled with polished photos of work events and vacations we'd taken together. It all looked perfectly normal, but it was the absence of anything personal that struck me. No recent posts about us. No signs of affection that once felt so natural. Something was missing. Something that wasn't there, but should have been. Then, I noticed a pattern. Jenna had been tagged in several photos at recent events, more than she'd mentioned to me. Most of them seemed harmless, but one post made my stomach drop. It was a candid shot of her at another work gathering a few weeks ago. She was sitting at a bar, leaning close to the same man from the previous photo. His name was tagged, Alex Carter. I clicked on his profile. The information was sparse, just a few professional posts and some pictures of himself in sleek suits. He worked in finance, according to his bio. Nothing alarming, but there was a familiarity in the way Jenna was posed in every picture he appeared in, like she was drawn to him. The seed of doubt blossomed into something darker. I felt like I was on the brink of discovering something terrible, but part of me still clung to the hope that I was wrong, that I was just overanalyzing. When Jenna called that evening, her voice was warm, almost overly cheerful. "How's your day, babe? Did you get much writing done?" "Not as much as I hoped," I admitted. "How about you? How's the party?" "Oh, it's fine," she replied, too quickly. "You know how these things are, lots of small talk and schmoozing. I'm just counting the hours until I can get back home to you." Her words should have reassured me, but they didn't. I forced a smile, even though she couldn't see it. "I miss you too." That night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I knew I couldn't let this go. I needed answers. The opportunity came the following afternoon. Jenna had left her laptop open on the dining table, something she rarely did. I hesitated, my conscience battling my growing suspicions, but the desire for the truth won out. With shaking hands, I opened her email. Most of the messages were mundane, work correspondence, newsletters, reminders. But then I saw it, a thread with Alex Carter. It was under a work-related subject line, but as I scrolled through the exchange, the tone shifted. What started as professional quickly became personal. "I can't wait to see you again," one of his emails read. "Last night was incredible. You looked stunning in that dress." Jenna's response made my heart stop. "You always know how to make me feel special. I can't stop thinking about you." I stared at the screen, the words blurring as my mind raced. The truth was out in the open now, undeniable and devastating. But it wasn't enough for me. I needed to confront her, yes, but I also needed to be sure there were no doubts, no excuses she could twist into lies. I started copying the emails, every word and timestamp, saving them on a flash drive. My hands trembled as I worked, the gravity of what I was uncovering sinking in with each click. When Jenna walked in the door that evening, smiling as if everything was normal, I struggled to keep my emotions in check. I knew I couldn't say anything yet. Not until I was ready. "Hey," she greeted me, leaning in for a kiss. I let her, though it took every ounce of willpower I had. "Hey," I replied. "How was your day?" "Busy as always," she said, tossing her purse onto the counter. "I'm exhausted. Let's just order takeout tonight." I nodded, watching her move through the room like a stranger. The woman I thought I knew had become someone unrecognizable. That night, as Jenna slept soundly beside me, I stared at the ceiling again, my mind racing with plans. This wasn't just about confronting her anymore. It was about preparing for what came next, for the fallout, for the revenge, for reclaiming my life. The following day, I couldn't focus on anything. I tried to write, but the words wouldn't come. My mind was consumed with thoughts of Jenna and Alex, what they had done, what they were still doing. I couldn't just sit and stew in my anger anymore. I needed to know everything. After Jenna left for work, I began combing through her things. It felt wrong, like I was violating some unspoken rule, but what did it matter? She had already shattered the trust between us. I opened her drawers, searched through her purse, even checked her closet. At first, I found nothing incriminating, just the usual clutter of someone's life. But then, in the back of her wardrobe, I spotted a small box I didn't recognize. My heart pounded as I pulled it out. Inside were keepsakes, notes, tickets, little trinkets. Among them, a folded napkin caught my eye. It was from a fancy restaurant we'd never been to. Scribbled across it in Jenna's handwriting was a date and the words, "Can't wait for tonight, Redheart." The date matched one of her supposed work trips. I clenched the napkin in my fist, my anger surging. Next, I turned my attention to her phone. Jenna always kept it close, but when she was home, she usually left it charging in the kitchen. That night, I waited until she fell asleep before I carefully took it from the counter. I knew her passcode, her birth date, and unlocked it with ease. What I found was even worse than I had imagined. There was a second messaging app I'd never seen before, hidden in a folder on her home screen. When I opened it, I was greeted with a series of chats, intimate, explicit messages between her and Alex. My stomach turned as I scrolled through them. They had shared everything, plans, confessions, even photos. "I can't stop thinking about last weekend," one message read. "You're all I want." Jenna's reply was equally damning. "Soon, my love. I'll make up an excuse to get away again." I wanted to throw the phone across the room, to wake her up and demand answers. But I didn't. Instead, I took screenshots of every message, saving them alongside the emails I had already copied. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about evidence. I wanted to be ready when the time came to confront her. The next morning, as Jenna sat across from me at breakfast, sipping her coffee, I couldn't help but wonder how she could look so calm, so composed, while hiding something so ugly. "I was thinking we should plan a weekend getaway," she said suddenly, her tone light and casual. "Just the two of us. It's been a while." I stared at her, searching her face for any sign of guilt. "Yeah," I said after a pause. "That sounds nice." She smiled, and for a moment, it felt like we were back in the early days of our marriage, when things were simple and happy. But then I remembered the messages, the lies, the betrayal, and the illusion shattered. Later that day, I decided to confront Alex. I wasn't sure how, but I needed to see him face to face, to look into the eyes of the man who had torn my life apart. Through his social media, I found the name of the company he worked for. It wasn't far from where Jenna's office was. I waited outside his building during my lunch break, my heart pounding as I spotted him leaving. He was tall and confident, dressed in an expensive suit that screamed success. Everything about him made my blood boil. I didn't approach him that day. Not yet. Instead, I watched from a distance, studying him, trying to figure out how to make my move. I wasn't just angry, I was calculating. If I was going to confront him, it would be on my terms, when he least expected it. As the days went on, I gathered more and more evidence, each piece adding fuel to the fire inside me. I felt like a detective in my own life, uncovering the truth bit by bit. But the more I uncovered, the less I recognized the world I thought I knew. This wasn't just about Jenna anymore. It was about taking control, about ensuring that when the truth finally came to light, I would be the one holding all the cards I couldn't stop. The more I discovered, the deeper I dug, uncovering layers of deception that made my blood boil. Jenna's double life wasn't just about Alex. It extended further than I had imagined. Late one evening, while she was in the shower, I took the opportunity to check her laptop again. I had already found the emails with Alex, but this time, I decided to dig through her cloud storage. It wasn't hard to access. Her password was the same as it had always been. What I found there was another dagger to the heart. Photos, videos, even receipts for hotel stays. Many were of her and Alex, laughing, holding hands, wrapped in each other's arms like they were a couple. Some of the photos were from places she had told me she'd been for work trips, but Alex was there, too. And then there were others, pictures of her with men I didn't recognize. I stared at the screen, my hands shaking. This wasn't just an affair. It was a web of lies, a deliberate dismantling of everything we had built together. My mind raced with questions. How long had this been going on? How many others were there? Did she ever even love me? The following day, I decided to test her. She had mentioned another business dinner that evening, one she claimed she couldn't skip. I played along, pretending not to care, even encouraging her to go. "Don't wait up," she said as she left, planting a kiss on my cheek like nothing was wrong. As soon as she was out the door, I followed. I wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. I tailed her car, keeping a safe distance, my heart pounding as she drove toward the city. She pulled into the parking lot of a high-end restaurant, one I recognized from the receipts I'd found. I parked nearby, watching as she walked inside. A few minutes later, Alex arrived. I stayed in the shadows, snapping pictures of them as they greeted each other. They hugged, too long, too intimately. They walked into the restaurant together, and I followed, slipping into a corner booth where I could observe unnoticed. Watching them was like watching a play where everyone but me knew the script. They laughed, touched hands, leaned close to share private whispers. My chest tightened with every smile Jenna gave him, every look that should have been reserved for me. When the waiter brought the check, Alex paid, and Jenna gave him a look that made my stomach turn. She wasn't just cheating, she was in love. Or at least she thought she was. They left together, heading toward his car. I followed them again, my pulse racing as they drove to a nearby hotel. I parked across the street, watching as they disappeared inside. Part of me wanted to storm in, to confront them in the act, but I held back. Not yet. I needed to think, to plan. That night, when Jenna returned home, she acted as if everything was normal. She climbed into bed beside me, kissed my cheek, and said, "I'm so tired. Work dinners are the worst." I bit back the anger bubbling inside me and nodded. "Yeah, I can imagine." She smiled, her eyes closing as if she were at peace. But I wasn't. My mind was racing with thoughts of revenge, of how I could make her feel even a fraction of the pain she had inflicted on me. I spent the next few days quietly preparing. I gathered every piece of evidence I had: emails, texts, photos, videos. I made duplicates of everything, storing them on flash drives and in cloud accounts Jenna didn't know about. This wasn't just about confronting her anymore. This was about making sure she couldn't lie her way out of it, about ensuring she would face the consequences of her actions. And then, I began laying the groundwork for the final blow. A way to ensure that when this all came crashing down, Jenna wouldn't just lose me, she would lose everything. By the end of the week, I had a plan. It wasn't enough to confront Jenna. I needed to make sure the fallout was absolute, that there would be no way for her to escape the consequences of what she'd done. Every detail had to be perfect. First, I contacted a divorce lawyer. I explained everything, from the emails and photos to the receipts and videos. The lawyer was sympathetic but direct. If you want the upper hand, you'll need irrefutable proof. Make it clear she violated the trust in your marriage. It'll make all the difference in court. I nodded, though I'd already been working on that part. I handed over copies of the evidence, ensuring everything was documented. The lawyer assured me this was more than enough to build a case that would leave Jenna with nothing. The next step was to bait Jenna into revealing her lies in a way she couldn't deny. I decided to confront her at her most vulnerable, in the middle of one of her rendezvous with Alex. It would be public, undeniable, and devastating. Jenna mentioned she had another business dinner planned for Friday evening. I kept my expression neutral, nodding along as she casually mentioned it over breakfast. "You've been really busy lately," I said, my tone light. "You must be exhausted." She smiled, looking almost guilty for a moment. "Yeah, it's been a lot. But it's worth it, you know? These dinners keep me in good standing with the team." I forced a smile. "I understand. Just let me know if there's anything I can do to help." The irony of my words made me sick, but her guard was completely down. On Friday, I followed her again. This time, I wasn't alone. I had hired a private investigator to accompany me, ensuring there would be a neutral third party to document everything. The PI was discreet, a quiet man in his 50s who had seen it all before. We tailed Jenna to the same hotel I'd seen her and Alex use before. This time, I didn't hesitate. I waited until I saw them enter a room, and then I made my move. With the PI behind me, I approached the front desk, presenting myself as Jenna's husband and asking for her room number. The receptionist looked hesitant, but when I explained I had an investigator with me and could prove my relationship to her, she relented. I knocked on the door, my heart pounding. There was a moment of silence, then hurried whispers from inside. The door opened a crack, and Alex's face appeared. His expression shifted from confusion to panic as he saw me. "Is Jenna here?" I asked, my voice steady but cold. No," he stammered, clearly lying. Before he could react, I pushed the door open. Jenna was inside, scrambling to cover herself with a bedsheet, her face pale as she realized what was happening. "What the hell are you doing here?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "I think the better question is, what are you doing here?" I shot back, my anger barely contained. The PI quietly stepped into the room, his camera clicking as he documented everything. The bed, their clothes strewn on the floor, the unmistakable guilt on their faces. Jenna's panic turned to anger. "How dare you invade my privacy like this? This is completely out of line." "Out of line?" I laughed bitterly. "You're cheating on me, Jenna. With him. And God knows how many others. Do you really think you can talk your way out of this?" Alex stood there, silent and useless, his face a mask of fear. He wasn't the confident man I'd seen in their photos. He was a coward, caught in the act. Jenna tried to regain control, her tone sharp. "You're being ridiculous. You don't know what you're talking about." I pulled out my phone, opening the folder of screenshots and emails. "Really? Because this says otherwise." Her face fell as she realized the depth of what I knew. She didn't say another word, just sat there, clutching the sheet around her like it could shield her from the truth. I walked out of the hotel room, the PI following close behind. He assured me the evidence was airtight, enough to make Jenna's lies crumble in court. But this was only the beginning. As I drove home that night, my mind raced with thoughts of what came next. Jenna had destroyed our marriage, but she wouldn't destroy me. It was time to finish what I'd started, to dismantle her world as thoroughly as she'd dismantled mine. The following morning, Jenna pretended nothing had happened. She didn't bring up the hotel confrontation, and neither did I. I knew her silence wasn't an admission of guilt, it was fear. She was waiting for my next move, unsure of what I had planned, and I intended to keep her guessing. She came down to breakfast, her expression carefully neutral. "Morning," she said casually, as if this was any other Saturday. Morning, I replied, keeping my tone calm. I didn't look up from my coffee, letting her stew in the quiet. She hesitated, then sat across from me. I was thinking we could spend the day together. Maybe take a drive or something. I raised an eyebrow. You mean like a date? Her smile faltered. Yeah, something like that. The audacity of her suggestion nearly made me laugh. That's sweet, but I have some errands to run. Her shoulders sagged, the disappointment flickering across her face before she quickly covered it up. She wanted to regain control, to manipulate me into believing everything was fine. But I wasn't playing along. I spent the rest of the day finalizing my plans. First, I met with my lawyer to ensure the divorce papers were ready. He assured me we had more than enough evidence to win the case and put Jenna in a corner where she'd walk away with nothing. Then, I contacted the HR department at Jenna's company. Using an anonymous tip, I forwarded the emails and photos between her and Alex. Her affair wasn't just a personal betrayal. It was a violation of workplace ethics. The HR rep's tone was professional, but firm as she assured me the matter would be investigated. Finally, I reached out to Jenna's parents. They had always been kind to me, treating me like a son. I wasn't sure how they would react, but I felt they deserved to know the truth. Her mother answered, her voice warm. Hello, dear. How are you? Not great, actually, I admitted. There's something I need to talk to you about. It's about Jenna. There was a long pause on the other end. What's wrong? I told her everything. The affair, the lies, the confrontation at the hotel. Her mother was stunned into silence, but when she finally spoke, her voice was trembling. I'm so sorry, she said. I can't believe she would do this to you. She did, I replied flatly, and I'm not going to let her get away with it. That evening, I came home to find Jenna sitting in the living room, scrolling through her phone. She looked up as I entered, trying to gauge my mood. How were your errands? She asked lightly. Productive, I said, sitting down across from her. Her eyes narrowed slightly. You've been acting strange lately. Is there something you want to talk about? I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. Actually, yes, there is. Her posture stiffened, and I could see the fear creeping into her expression. I've spoken to a lawyer, I began, my tone calm but cold, and I've started the process of filing for divorce. Her mouth fell open. What? You're divorcing me? You don't get to play the victim here, Jenna. You cheated on me. Repeatedly. I have the evidence to prove it, and I'm done pretending this marriage can be saved. She started to argue, her voice rising. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, I interrupted. You made your choices, and now you'll face the consequences. Her face crumpled as the weight of my words sank in, but I wasn't finished. I've also notified your company about your relationship with Alex. You should expect to hear from HR soon. And I've spoken to your parents. They know everything. You had no right. I had every right, I snapped, my voice sharp. You destroyed this marriage, Jenna, not me. For the first time, she looked truly defeated. She sat there in silence, staring at the floor as the reality of her situation hit her. That night, I moved my things into the guest room. It was a small gesture, but it felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Jenna stayed in the living room, likely trying to figure out how to salvage what little she had left. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger, sadness, even a flicker of relief. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in months, I felt like I was taking control of my life again. This was only the beginning. The following week was a whirlwind of chaos and revelations. Jenna's perfect facade began to crack, and the life she had built on lies started to crumble. It was both satisfying and heartbreaking to watch. The first blow came on Monday morning. I was sipping my coffee when Jenna's phone rang, the ringtone sharp and urgent. She glanced at the screen, her face paling when she saw the caller ID. It's work, she muttered, excusing herself to the kitchen. I didn't need to hear the conversation to know what was happening. The HR department had reviewed the evidence, and the fallout was inevitable. When she returned, her face was flushed, her hands trembling. They've suspended me, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Suspended you? I repeated, feigning surprise. Why? They? They said there's an investigation, she stammered. Something about inappropriate relationships. I raised an eyebrow, fighting the urge to smirk. That sounds serious. Her glare was sharp, but she didn't say anything. What could she say? She knew I was behind it, even if she couldn't prove it. The next blow came later that evening. Jenna's parents called, demanding to see her. She tried to brush it off, claiming she was busy, but they insisted. It's important, her mother said firmly. I drove her to their house, the silence in the car thick and oppressive. When we arrived, her parents were waiting in the living room, their faces grim. Sit down, Jenna, her father said, his voice stern. She hesitated but obeyed, glancing nervously between them. We know about the affair, her mother began, her voice trembling with disappointment. How could you do this? To him? To us? Jenna's defenses crumbled under their scrutiny. She tried to explain, to justify her actions, but her words were weak, hollow. For the first time, I saw her as she truly was, fragile and unsure, without the confidence she had wielded so easily before. Her father shook his head, his disappointment palpable. We raised you better than this, Jenna. You've thrown away everything for. What? A fling? It wasn't just a fling, she protested, but her voice broke, and tears streamed down her face. I stayed silent, letting her unravel under the weight of their judgment. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about accountability. As the days passed, Jenna's world continued to collapse. She was officially terminated from her job by the end of the week. Alex, unsurprisingly, ghosted her. She tried to call him repeatedly, but he didn't answer. When she finally reached him, the conversation ended with her throwing her phone against the wall in frustration. He's a coward, she spat, her voice shaking with anger. After everything, he just leaves? I didn't bother to remind her that she was the one who had chosen to betray me for him. With the divorce proceedings underway, I began making arrangements to protect myself financially. My lawyer had been clear. The more I secured now, the less leverage Jenna would have. I separated our accounts, redirected my income, and froze any joint credit cards. By the time she realized what I'd done, it was too late. You're leaving me with nothing, she cried one evening, her face a mask of desperation. No, Jenna, I said calmly. You left yourself with nothing. Actions have consequences, and now you're facing yours. That weekend, I began packing my things. It was time to move on, to leave the house that had become a monument to our broken marriage. Jenna watched me silently, tears in her eyes, but she didn't try to stop me. As I loaded the last box into my car, she finally spoke. Do you really hate me that much? I turned to her, my expression unreadable. I don't hate you, Jenna, but I can't love someone who destroyed me. She nodded, tears streaming down her face as she watched me drive away. That night, I stayed in a small apartment I'd rented downtown. It wasn't much, but it was mine, a fresh start. As I sat on the couch, surrounded by boxes and silence, I felt a strange sense of peace. Jenna had taken so much from me, but she hadn't won. I still had my dignity, my freedom, and the chance to rebuild. And that was more than enough. The fallout wasn't over yet, but for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again. Jenna wasn't finished. As much as her life was unraveling, she wasn't the type to let go quietly. The week after I moved out, I received a call from my lawyer. She's contesting the divorce, he said, his tone calm but serious. On what grounds? I asked, incredulous. She's claiming emotional abuse, he replied. It's a common tactic when one party wants to stall or negotiate a better settlement. I laughed bitterly. Emotional abuse? I'm the one who's been cheated on, lied to, humiliated. She's desperate, he explained. And when people are desperate, they'll say or do anything. Don't worry, we have the evidence. But you need to prepare for a fight. The next few weeks were a blur of depositions, meetings with my lawyer, and gathering additional evidence. Jenna's accusations were baseless, but they still stung. To hear her paint me as the villain in a story where she was the obvious antagonist felt like a slap in the face. But I refused to let her rewrite the narrative. I provided my lawyer with every email, photo, and video I had. I even turned over the footage from the hotel confrontation, ensuring there was no doubt about her infidelity. My lawyer built a case so airtight that even Jenna's most skilled lies couldn't poke holes in it. Meanwhile, Jenna began reaching out to mutual friends, spinning her version of events. She claimed I had been cold, distant, and controlling. Some of them bought into her lies, but others saw through her facade. One evening, I got a call from Sarah, one of our oldest friends. "Hey," she began hesitantly, "I just wanted to check on you. I heard what Jenna's been saying, and I don't believe her. I just thought you should know." I felt a lump rise in my throat. "Thanks, Sarah. That means a lot." "She's grasping at straws," Sarah continued. "And honestly, people are starting to see her for who she really is. Just hang in there, okay?" Her words were a small comfort, a reminder that not everyone had abandoned me. As the court date approached, Jenna grew increasingly erratic. She showed up at my apartment unannounced one night, pounding on the door. "Let me in," she shouted, her voice trembling with anger. I opened the door a crack, meeting her wild gaze. "What do you want, Jenna?" "You can't do this to me," she said, her voice breaking. "You can't just leave me with nothing." "You did this to yourself," I said firmly. "You cheated. You lied. And now you're facing the consequences." She pushed against the door, her desperation palpable. "I made a mistake, okay? But we can fix this. We can try again." I shook my head. "It's too late for that, Jenna. You didn't just make a mistake. You made a choice. Over and over again." Her tears turned to anger. "You think you're so righteous, don't you? Like you've never done anything wrong?" "I may not be perfect," I said, "but I didn't destroy our marriage. That was all you." She stormed off, slamming the door behind her. The day of the hearing finally arrived. Jenna sat across from me in the courtroom, her face pale and drawn. Her lawyer presented her case, a weak attempt to paint me as an emotionally abusive husband who had driven her into Alex's arms. But when my lawyer presented our evidence, the truth became undeniable. The emails, photos, and videos painted a clear picture of Jenna's betrayal. The judge's expression grew colder with each piece of evidence, his disapproval evident. When the ruling came down, it was swift and decisive. Jenna was denied spousal support, and I was awarded the lion's share of our assets. She walked out of that courtroom with nothing but the clothes on her back. That night, I sat in my apartment, the weight of the past months finally lifting. I wasn't the same man I had been before Jenna's betrayal, but I was stronger, wiser. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. The court ruling brought me relief, but it also left a void. For years, my life had revolved around Jenna, her career, her ambitions, her betrayal. Now that it was over, I didn't know what to do with myself. I threw myself into work, taking on new writing projects and pushing the boundaries of what I thought I could achieve. It was therapeutic in a way, pouring my emotions into words and creating something meaningful from the wreckage of my life. I also started reconnecting with old friends, people I had drifted away from during my marriage. They welcomed me back with open arms, their support a reminder that I wasn't alone. One night, Sarah invited me out for drinks with a group of mutual friends. I hesitated at first, but eventually agreed. Sitting in that bar, surrounded by laughter and camaraderie, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in months: hope. As the weeks turned into months, I began to rebuild. I moved into a better apartment, one with big windows and plenty of sunlight. I bought new furniture, new clothes, and even treated myself to a weekend getaway. It wasn't just about starting over. It was about reclaiming my identity, rediscovering who I was outside of my marriage. One afternoon, while working in a coffee shop, I met someone. Her name was Emily, and she was everything Jenna wasn't: kind, grounded, and genuine. We struck up a conversation over a shared frustration with the slow Wi-Fi, and before I knew it, we were laughing like old friends. I didn't rush into anything. I wasn't ready for another relationship, and Emily respected that. But she became a source of comfort, a reminder that not all connections were built on lies. Jenna's life didn't fare as well. Word of her affair had spread, and she found herself ostracized from her professional and social circles. Alex had moved on, leaving her to pick up the pieces alone. She reached out to me once, months after the divorce was finalized. Her voice was shaky, almost unrecognizable. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," she said. "For what?" I asked. "For everything," she replied. "I ruined us. I ruined you." I didn't respond immediately. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to let go of the anger that still lingered. But another part of me couldn't forget the pain she had caused. "I hope you find peace, Jenna," I said finally. "But I don't think I'll ever be able to forgive you." She hung up without another word. My interactions with Emily became more frequent. She had a way of making me feel at ease, of reminding me that not all relationships were doomed to fail. One evening, as we walked through the park, she turned to me with a hesitant smile. "You seem lighter lately," she said. "Do I?" I asked, surprised. She nodded. "Like you're finally letting go of the past." Her words stayed with me. She was right. The anger, the bitterness, it was still there, but it wasn't as heavy as it had been. I was learning to let go, to move forward. The real turning point came when I decided to sell the house. It had been sitting empty since the divorce, a constant reminder of what I had lost. Letting it go felt like shedding the last remnants of my old life. The process was cathartic. I went through our belongings, keeping only the things that held meaning for me. The rest, I donated or discarded. As I stood in the empty house for the final time, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. This was where it had all fallen apart, but it was also where I had begun to rebuild. Months turned into a year, and life slowly fell into place. I published a book, one that drew heavily from my experiences. It wasn't a memoir, but it was honest and raw, a reflection of the journey I had been on. The book received praise, not just for its writing but for its authenticity. Readers connected with the story, finding pieces of themselves in its pages. It was a reminder that I wasn't alone, that pain and healing were universal. Emily was there for every step, cheering me on, offering her quiet strength. We weren't officially a couple, but we were something, and for now, that was enough. On the anniversary of my divorce, I found myself sitting on a beach at sunset. The sky was painted in hues of orange and pink, the waves lapping gently at the shore. I thought about Jenna, about the life we had shared and the pain she had caused. I thought about the man I had been before her betrayal and the man I was becoming. I wasn't fully healed. Maybe I never would be. But I was moving forward, one step at a time. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I felt a sense of peace. Life hadn't turned out the way I'd planned, but it was still mine to live. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready to embrace it.